All right. And joining us today for the podcast, we've got Keegan Matheson, who is a Blue Jays reporter for MLB.com. Also does a lot of TV and radio analyst work as well, too. First and foremost, Keegan, welcome back to the Great North. How's quarantine going in your place?
Going slow, but good. It's good to be back. I'm losing the entire advantage of being in spring training, which is a bit of a tan for my pasty self, but it's day 11 of 14 after getting back from spring training. It was interesting being down there. That interesting experience continues here, but what a spring, one of a kind, hopefully.
Yeah. Hopefully this is a one-time deal and we're not dealing with this still again in 2022, but knock on wood, knock on every piece of wood that we've got around us here. We're 3 days away from opening day already, and in the Blue Jays case, unfortunately, the injuries are also happening to pile up as we get closer to opening day as well, too. Biggest news, obviously, being last Wednesday, prized offseason acquisition, Kirby Yates undergoes Tommy John surgery. He's done for the year. How big of a void does this leave in the Blue Jays bullpen moving forward? And who do you sort of see filling that role in the interim?
It's big news because this bullpen has so many good pieces, but with Yates in that back end, everything else fell into place so nicely. It's the same as it was in 2020 when Ken Giles went down. Having Giles or having a top-end closer in the back end, it matters a lot more when you're a good team. The Blue Jays are going to be playing a lot of close games that matter. It's easy to project them being in September, and we're talking about a 1 or 2 game race. That's easy to see. So you need a closer to lock things down. Now, thankfully for the Blue Jays, they have depth. That starts with Jordan Romano, who, if this happened 10 years ago, boom, Jordan Romano's the closer, easy. But now in baseball, nobody has a role, nobody has a position. It's much more flexible. So you'll see a lot of what you saw last year in 2020 with Charlie Montoyo moving guys around and targeting the highest leverage instead of the 9th inning. So I think Jordan Romano is still that guy who will get the highest leverage innings for now. But you're also looking at guys like Chatwood, Dolis, has closed certainly in the past, Ryan Baraki, even Julian Merriweather. Really, all of these guys are capable of pitching in leverage. So it's going to be a hot hand situation. But that just gets tricky because do you ride a hot hand until he gets cold? Do you jump out in front of it? These are problems that you don't have to consider if you have a Kirby Yates. So it just puts the Blue Jays in a position where they need to make more decisions, which isn't always great, but at least they have options.
Yeah. And do you sort of see this closer by committee approach, or possibly Romano sort of getting a extended look, at least in the early parts of the season, being the pattern moving forward? Or do you think that knowing that he's already out for the year, it's not just, okay, he's back in a month or so. Do you think the Blue Jays might actually be in the market already for a more experienced sort of traditional closer?
I think that could really happen in through June, July, going up to the trade deadline. I think the Blue Jays have everything working in their favor to completely control the trade deadline if they want to. Because the really attractive thing about how they've gotten here is that they've really just spent money, which is easy. It's not my money, so it's very easy to throw that around. But by just spending money and developing guys, they have a number 7 farm system, as we rank it at MLB Pipeline, and top arms, top infielders, catchers that other teams really like. So by the time the Blue Jays get to this deadline, being able to deal from their prospect pool, but also take on contracts, there are teams around baseball who are still going to be looking to shed payroll, looking to make financial moves instead of baseball moves, unfortunately. But the Blue Jays can be the team that benefits from that because they have that ability to take on deals. So closers come into the situation there. Starting pitching definitely does. But I think the Blue Jays can afford to be a little patient off the top. Maybe Romano steps forward and is a 1.2 ERA guy dominating the league.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe Phelps comes in and has a hot year. It's the nature of relievers where some guy that we're not even talking about could come in and have a really dominant year. So you can be a bit patient, but it's got to be on the list.
Yeah. Continuing the trend of hurting arms there, if we go to the starting pitching side, we've got Nate Pearson currently sidelined with a groin strain. Robbie Ray just got revealed he's going to miss at least his first start there. What sort of a timeline do we have on these two pitchers getting back to the rotation?
So Robbie Ray is a bit more clear right now. He fell going down the stairs and bruised his elbow. Now, thankfully with a bruise, you're not talking about anything strained, any ligaments, soft tissue, anything like that. So right now the Blue Jays are saying he'll miss his first start, which if it stays to that, is okay. Once you get into missing a couple of starts, well, then you're talking about, is he still built all the way up? Does he need to pitch at the alternate site? We'll see. Nate Pearson, as of now, and this is March 29, he has not thrown bullpens yet. He has been throwing long toss, but at this point, Pearson has been out for a couple of weeks. I think it was March 14, he re-aggravated that groin strain. So at this point, he needs to build back up again. That's the tricky part of being hurt in spring training. If it's the middle of the season, sure, go down to AAA, make a start, get stretched out. But at this point in the year, Pearson was still getting back to 100%. And it's been tough for him. It's been a while since he's just been able to go out and start every 5 days. And you'd love to see that. He is so incredibly talented, but baseball teaches us again and again that, throwing 100 and having that elite slider is only half or a third of the battle, really. So he needs to get on the mound.
Yeah. And rounding out our injury report here, we are going to move on to other baseball related things, but I mean, it's top of mind. So we have to address, obviously, the big free agent acquisition, George Springer, currently sidelined with an oblique injury there. What sort of timelines have we gotten from that? And when can fans actually see him making his regular season debut for the Blue Jays?
Yeah, Springer wants to be there for opening day. I'm sure the Blue Jays would love that if it was possible. What you're talking about a grade 2 strain. That's that's a real issue, and obliques are very tricky, especially for a swinger with a big swing like that. I think that Springer, in this situation, the Blue Jays might be trying to be as cautious as possible, because you've just given a man $150 million US dollars. So if you're going to miss 5 or 6 games off the top, backdating the IL date until today, that's okay. He can still get into 150 ball games this year, and you're happy with 150. But an oblique is always tricky because baseball is such a burst movement sport. There are times where Springer will be on the field not moving all that much for an hour, and then suddenly you're asked to swing at a major league fastball. That really tests the body, especially an oblique. So that'll be tough to see, but the challenging part, the Blue Jays say, is that Springer is so strong and his pain tolerance is so high that it may not be showing the same symptoms as a normal grade 2 strain. If I had a grade 2 strain, I'd be on that couch over there complaining, right? But George Springer is built like a linebacker and a very good baseball player. So it'll be interesting to see how this is handled.
Yeah. And obviously another wrinkle this year that you just experienced yourself as well too, being down in Florida, is the fact that obviously games aren't going to be taking place north of the border quite yet. They're taking things sort of month by month, obviously, but in a similar fashion to the Raptors having to play out of Tampa, what sort of effect do you think losing that home field advantage will have for the Blue Jays? Because for the Raps, that home court advantage being lost was huge, and we see it in their record this year. How do you think that'll affect the ball club?
This is really interesting, and it's always a case of framing, and as a writer, I love some good framing, but the Raptors have been an interesting case. Of course, when the season started to go wrong, well, suddenly Tampa was a disadvantage. Well, I understand the home court advantage, the Raptors have an incredible one here with Raptors fans, but how much does that swing a game? It's hard to quantify in baseball. Now, playing out of Dunedin Stadium, their TD Ballpark, the Blue Jays, is that an advantage for some of them, understanding how it works there? It has its quirks. It's a hitter's ballpark most days. If you are an outfielder, some days can be great. Some days can be a nightmare, because just the basic structural idea of this stadium is that you have a lower ring behind the back, and then it's wide open. This isn't Yankee Stadium where the wind is getting blocked coming in from side to side. This is a minor league park, and we have seen a few absolute events at outfield. So is that going to be enough to swing a game? I don't know, but there are ways that you can look at it from both sides. There are ways the Blue Jays can lean into this and make it an advantage of their own, because kind of like Buffalo last year, if you are the New York Yankees and you are used to being at Yankee Stadium and having the finest of the finest everything, from the chair you sit on in your locker to the snacks in the cafeteria, once you show up to Buffalo or Dunedin and you're suddenly in a spring training clubhouse again, it's not the most comfortable. So I think there are ways you can look at this from both sides, but it's really about the Blue Jays embracing it, which is easier this year after Buffalo last year. The players, to a man, seem to be under the impression of, okay, at least we know this year. Last year was a mess, bouncing all over. This year they know, and they accept it, I think, embrace it a little more.
Yeah. Well, you had tweeted out the other day as well too that I think it was left field is a bit of an adventure depending on the time of day, just with the angle that the sun's coming in at there. So is that something that you see sort of playing a factor this year with those afternoon games that might get a little bit squirrely in the outfield?
I think that was around 6, 7 o'clock when that sun was coming over the concourse into left field. And I'm not sure how that will go as the sunlight changes through the season, but there are times where that ballpark will just play a bit strange, and there are outfielders from other teams. Let's say, again, if you are a Yankees outfielder, well, every time you go to Boston, you play around with the green monster. You play around with the right field corner that is strange. But coming to Dunedin Stadium, that's a bit different. So the Blue Jays, at least understanding some of those quirks, is a start. I don't think fly ball pitchers are going to have a lot of fun there, especially on days where it's blowing. Someone like Tanner Roark, for example, who's given up some home runs in the past, that's getting a bit dicey. You really want to keep the ball on the ground. That's why a pitcher like TJ Zoik, for example, the depth starter, having a ground ball guy is really valuable there, because every spring we see pop flies just carry out. We see balls leave the stadium entirely. It's a home run hitter's park for sure.
Yeah. And we mentioned off the top there, obviously they're taking it month by month. The goal is to get back to Toronto at some point, and whether that's in front of no fans or limited capacity fans remains to be seen. But if you were a betting man, do you think we actually get meaningful ball games in the 6, or do you think that given the sort of slower than usual rollout of the vaccinations north of the border, that we might just be punting this to 2022 for a full reset?
I want to be an optimist. I want to point to something like the All-Star break as a very, very loose idea of where to target. But it all depends on the border and the government and the vaccine rollout. And it's so different. I think we're really starting to appreciate how different it is place to place. I have friends in the United States who are my age, in their early 30s, getting vaccinated. And I'm saying, well, I have no idea when that's happening here in Ontario. So not to get too specific on that, but just the difference in how that's happening and where is going to matter a lot. Even after the Blue Jays and their staff are vaccinated, it still matters for public health here. And the border is really the big issue. So when I like to be optimistic about it, but then I wake up each morning and see tweets with daily case totals, and I think, ooh, we'll see. We'll see. So it's, if I were a betting man, it wouldn't be a bet I'm making, because it's so risky and so up in the air. And yes, it relies on the Blue Jays a bit. They've done their parts, avoiding positive cases and doing the work they've done down there. But so much of this is still up to the federal government. And when we get into those topics, it's so far outside of what we're used to talking about in sports, how that works with public health, that it just becomes a completely different discussion and so hard to nail down.
Yeah. And we won't go down that rabbit hole there. We're going to stay as a sports podcast for today, at least. So we'll redirect it to this question here. On a better note, outside of those obviously free agents that we had already talked about, lots of new faces to the Blue Jays this year. But in terms of prospects or people maybe making their MLB debut, who are some names that have broken camp with the Blue Jays, and maybe you're still even on the bubble that haven't been announced yet, that you can see donning a Jays uniform this year?
The bigger news yesterday was Alejandro Kirk, the catcher, being named to the active roster, their number 5 prospect. And this was a quote-unquote competition with him and Reese McGuire. It wasn't really. Alejandro Kirk, having him on the roster makes this a better roster, period. He can continue to develop at the major league level. I know that's a divide among some development people, but Kirk, even at 22, he can figure out the next steps in the major leagues, backing up Danny Jansen. And he is a major league bat. Whether you're starting him at catcher or if you're putting him in at DH for a little bit, this guy can hold his own in the major leagues. I think he's going to be a big piece of this. When you look to the pitching depth, in the bullpen, it was fairly set. A couple of surprises with Tim Meza. Good on him coming back from Tommy John a year and a half ago and already cracking this roster. I did not think that was going to happen early in camp at all. I think even if Meza threw strikes and was healthy, I would have called that a good, productive camp. But he exceeded all expectations. When you're looking to the rotation, a couple of guys that won't crack the roster now, maybe late 2021, but starting with Alek Manoah, the number 7 prospect, I believe we have him as, he was the star of camp, period. going up against the Yankees, and in one of his outings, striking out 7 in a row, 3 perfect innings. This guy has only thrown, I think, 17 pro innings back in 2019 after he was drafted, and came into camp and just dominated. It's good to have a high 90s fastball and a slider, but everybody does. So I was expecting Manoah to come into camp and flash it a little bit, but be wild, hit a guy, give up a home run, like prospects do. He dominated, and he does it with style. He has a confidence that you need to back up, and he backs it up. So he's going to be fascinating to watch this year. And then the other would be Simeon Richardson. This guy is 20 years old, but very mature. Has a very mature pitching arsenal with 4 pitches, works so fast, which I love because he is, he's 5-10 seconds between each pitch over and over, really controls the game. So these are 2 young guys coming up as starting depth that would just be such a huge advantage for the Blue Jays if they worked out. And it's always an if with baseball prospects, but getting some pitching depth internally would be really great at this point for the Blue Jays. Not just a 5 or 6 or 7 guy, but someone who can come up and be a number 2 or a number 3, because not only does that give you a good pitcher, it probably saves you $15 million in free agency. So that's always good.
Yeah. And obviously people love rankings, people love lists, and that's a huge part of what you guys do over at MLB.com is you put together your prospects lists and all of that there. So if we're looking at the Blue Jays, who are maybe 1 or 2 prospects that you are most excited about? It doesn't have to be someone debuting this year, but just long-term potential-wise that you are really excited to see at the major league level.
Their catching depth is very impressive here. I think when you go down at number 8, Gabriel Moreno, the young catcher, I expect him to start in Double-A. The Blue Jays are really high on Moreno behind the plate. He was a shortstop when the Blue Jays signed him, actually, but they took a look at him, put him behind the plate, and he's their number 8 guy right now. I think he has the potential to move very quickly. I think their catching depth is really impressive. Around the league, other people take notice. At number 6 is a young shortstop here, Aurelvis Martinez. And back a couple of years ago, he was signed out of the Dominican Republic. His bonus was in that 3.4, 3.5 million range. A really advanced hitter. And he's a good example of someone who was hurt by the lost season in 2020. Because he is someone who very soon should be jumping into that top 100 picture, really generating a lot of hype. That's just hard to do when you're scrimmaging against guys. Nobody's going to get all that excited when you're putting up numbers against your own pitching staff. And then down, let me make sure we have the number right on this next guy here. Where's Yosfer Zulueta on my list? Number 23, Cuban right-hander. And this guy was signed by the Blue Jays, underwent Tommy John right away. So he was forgotten about over a year and a half as that happens. But Zulueta, coming out of Cuba, has a huge fastball. He was up to 98, 99. Hasn't touched 100 yet, but I think he will. And this is one of those classic prospect arms that you dream on. What's the percentage chance it works out? Maybe not the highest, but the ceiling there is just out of this world for Zulueta. So he should be on your short list of guys to watch this season as he gets into minor league games, because the fastball is huge. I know we all love triple-digit fastball ratings when we talk about prospects. So he'll be an interesting one to watch, but a lot of talent in this system still.
Yeah, and obviously it being such a weird year, not only this season, but last season as well, too, at the minor league levels. Like the minor leagues have essentially been decimated and lots of change coming on that front. With the prospects essentially playing simulated games, exhibition games, all of that, is there anything that Blue Jays are outside, any teams have been doing that's sort of different or unique to try and get these guys some more game reps or anything like that? Or is everyone sort of in the same boat as far as simulated games, keep them at the sort of Cactus League sites or whatever?
It's fairly similar, given the protocols. It's, if it weren't for those protocols, maybe you grab a nearby NCAA team and play them for a game or something like that. Maybe there would be more opportunities, but given the protocols and staying in those bubbles, it's been a lot of competing against one another. So when you speak to the guys about that experience, and this goes for that alternate training site as well, what they like about it, and I'm sure there's lots that they don't like about it. They'd rather be in the major leagues and not facing their own guys every day. But one thing they like about it a lot is that you can focus on one specific thing. Now, let's say you are a an outfield prospect in Double A, and you are having trouble hitting curveballs. Well, over a week, how many curveballs are you getting that are good, where you can really practice? You know, how many times are you getting into that count? How many times are you seeing it right out of the hand? It takes so long. Or if you're trying to steal, so if you're trying to work on your base stealing, how many times are you getting done? How many times is second base open in front of you? Are there 2 outs? Are you getting the go sign? Whereas at the alternate training site, who cares? Go out and try to steal 50 bases in an hour, or go out and have pitchers throw you curveballs for an hour straight, because there's not a worry of failure. There's not a worry of numbers being kept. And if you're trying to steal bases, for example, if you screw up, you're not robbing the guy at the plate of an at-bat. It's low stakes where you can recreate game scenarios instead of waiting for them over weeks and weeks on the road, riding minor league buses and eating Taco Bell. You know, it's a much more controlled, I think, proactive development environment. So that's what teams envision happening at complexes going forward, where you can just really hone in on something. Because you hear GMs and farm directors say that a lot, where they'll say, like, I wish I could just take this prospect and pull him out of games for a week and only show him high fastballs or only make them throw sliders. Because once you start struggling in the minor leagues, man, it's hard to adjust while you're losing, while you're struggling.
Yeah. Another big offseason story, obviously, was made of Vladdy Jr.'s weight loss and whatever sort of crash diet he went on. He clearly had some good results, but now that you've actually sort of seen him at the plate in a handful of games, a lot of people were concerned, okay, when you lose that much weight, is it going to sap his power? Is he going to be a different hitter? What have you sort of seen in the handful of games that you've observed him?
It's been encouraging because, you know, all through the offseason, yes, it was great to see Guerrero working out, and it was great to see those 10,000 Instagram videos. That's a good step. But what matters is how it translates to the field. You know, if a player is in different shape, that's good for them as a person. But if it's not translating and resulting in better statistics, you know, that's what this is about in baseball. So to see it actually work is very encouraging, because all throughout this, a point I kept making is that, listen, he has grown up big and strong. If you're changing that body all of a sudden, it probably helps, but it might not. It might throw off a swing. It might take some power away from him with a body that he's not used to. So thankfully it has worked out, and he's worked on his strength as well. Full credit to Vlad. It's been a great change for him. I think 42 pounds dating back to last summer camp. The most encouraging thing, yes, he's hitting the ball hard, but whatever. He's always going to smoke the baseball. He's hitting it in the air, finally, because the last couple of seasons, he beat the ball into the ground. He is never going to beat out ground ball singles. That's not going to be his game, and that's fine. But he's finally lifting that ball. And even in the minor leagues, one of Vlad's issues, and this is really nitpicky, but Vlad hit a lot of low liners that even if he just got under them a bit more, they're way gone. Yeah. He hit so many doubles at the wall, denting the wall. But if he starts lifting the ball just a bit more, his natural exit velocity is going to create a huge number of home runs. All he needs to do, period, is lift the ball, hit the ball in the air, and his numbers are going to take off. So that's been encouraging so far. And we'll see how that stretches through the season, because the big thing for him, and you know, credit to him again on this, he admitted, I got tired, you know, over a full season. And you know, a full 162 games, I mean, even covering it by the end of the summer, I'm just worn out. And I'm not even playing the game, right? It is a grind every single day to be playing Major League Baseball. There's not that many off days or off weeks in between. So we'll see how that holds up, but so far, so good.
Yeah. Would you say it's maybe fair then to say it'll have more of an effect defensively than at the plate for him there? Like, have you noticed he's a little bit more spry in the field?
It could, yeah. He has very quick feet. I think that when we see a bigger guy like Vlad, we say, okay, that's a slow plotter in the field. No, like Vlad has really quick feet, quick hands, quick twitchy movements. Those good hands help him at first base. Now, he wanted to play some more third. I don't see that happening all that often, because back in 2019, when Vlad had such bad defensive metrics, and they were capital B bad, most of that came from balls he was coming in on. So number one, he's having to bend down over with a larger frame, but also that's when flexibility comes in. Bending over with your hamstrings. Vladdy would get bent over and completely lose his equilibrium. He would be off balance, falling side to side. That's when you lose your fundamentals. So I think flexibility is a really huge part of this. It's not as fun to talk about, it's home run to talk about, but Vlad's flexibility, and he had an oblique thing in the past too, keeping soft tissue muscle health for a swing as big as his. That's what made Jose Bautista so special. If any other hitter in baseball tries to do Jose Bautista's swing, their oblique would jump out of their body. But Bautista stretches 23 hours a day, right? So you see where flexibility can really come into it, the torque of that swing. I think that's going to be an underrated part of this, but huge for Vladdy.
Yeah. Now, trash can banging notwithstanding there, if we sort of follow the similar path to the Houston Astros in the early 2010s and how they developed into eventually a World Series champion, do you see the Jays sort of following a similar model right now, or see any similarities between the two? Because they are both built through the draft as homegrown talented, the odd free agent signing here, but mostly from within.
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities there. And I think that's, number one, just on the surface between Houston and Toronto, there's some similarities. But I think this is just how well-built teams come together. You've seen it over and over. And let's even go back to the 2015 and 2016 Jays. Those were great teams. Those were fun teams. And to do it the way they did it, sure, you do that 10 days out of 10. To give yourself a legitimate chance at the World Series, you do that every day. But there's a reason that it fell off so quickly after that, is because you traded and traded and traded. You were really aiming for 2015 and 2016. But the way that Houston did it with more development, and I spoke with Mark Shapiro about this recently, he pointed back to those late 90s Cleveland teams who won 5 straight divisions, I think 6 out of 7, but went to the World Series a couple times. That was a lot of young talent being developed and then bringing in stars. For Cleveland back then, it was actually Roberto Alomar coming out in 1999, I think. But a lot of that star talent being added at the right time. And then the similarity extends to the Blue Jays having that last step probably be needing starting pitching, needing that last piece. And I understand the excitement has gotten everyone to a point where it's boom, George Springer's in town, this is the year, World Series, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe, we'll see. But this was a 67-win team a couple years ago, right? You don't immediately go to everything being perfect. And the last part that you need to fill in is that rotation. And that usually is that last part for these teams coming up on a championship run. Houston added some major arms over those years there. Thankfully, the Blue Jays have the ability to do that, and they haven't completely emptied the cupboard. But, there's still some left.
Yeah. And do you see them making that sort of tipping point, emptying the cupboard, like this is our window to compete? Is it, this year? Is it 2 years from now? What sort of time frame do you put on that?
I think this trade deadline is a massive opportunity, huge, because there are still going to be a lot of teams who are really feeling the effects of no fans in the stands of the last 2 years in baseball. The Blue Jays have a lot of flexibility going into next year, because you only have Springer and Grichuk really on big deals, and none of them can be designated as quote unquote bad deals really at this point. You're not carrying an anchor contract. So going into next year, what are you losing? You're losing Semien at $18 million, Roark at $12 million, Ray at $8 million, Yates, Matz are both up above $5 million. There's so much payroll to play with here for the Blues. And if you can find on the open market with 2 or 3 years left on a deal. Think back to the Yu Darvish deal the Padres made. That's a good example in terms of contract structure. A guy who is still good and is being paid pretty fair money, but his team just doesn't love the idea of paying that. Yeah. That's where the Blue Jays can swoop in and add just by using financial muscle. You don't even need to blow out your farm system at that point, because something needs to stick around in the farm system. There's got to be something. So I think this trade deadline is a huge opportunity. Next offseason, the Blue Jays should be able to drive the market once again. There's a lot of pitching talent, but also a lot of infield talent there. A lot of shortstop talent with the Seagers, Correas of the world. That'll be really interesting. But there are opportunities. What makes it attractive now is that there's not just one. Back in those 2015 and 16 teams, it was boom, a peak, and then it fell down. The Blue Jays, this word sustainable that is thrown around. Sustainable winning is as close to impossible as you can get in sports. Very few teams achieve that. But they've at least set themselves up for a run at it with what they've done.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Keegan, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us there today. But before we let you go, we have to get at least a prediction here. Where do you see the Jays finishing in the AL East, and do they squeak into the playoffs or not?
I see them getting a wild card spot. I think the Yankees, as they go through the season, get a bit healthier with their pitching. And, the Yankees are always going to add. So I think when the Blue Jays are looking up, the Rays will be a competitor as well there. But I think a wild card spot is realistic. It might be a situation where their pitching depth holds them back a bit through the year. Maybe there's a bit of a late run, again, that deadline. But what's the over-under most folks are setting out for wins? In around that 86, 87 range, I think that's pretty fair. If they were to get into that 85 or 86, make a run at the wild card, I think this is the year where they're no longer happy to be there. They've got to make some noise and maybe win a series. But then 2022, I think, is when you get very serious about a late run into the playoffs.
Amazing. For those that are listening, where can people find you or check out your articles or anything like that?
Yeah, everything you'll find, it's at MLB.com and BlueJays.com. Then on Twitter at Keegan Matheson, Keegan Matheson.
Beautiful. All right. Well, again, thank you for taking the time, and good luck in the lead up to opening day. Is that when your quarantine ends as well, too? Is that an ironic?
It is. The day I've been waiting for a few weeks. So April 1, it's the last day of my quarantine. So I will cover the Blue Jays game. And at 12:01 a.m., I will sprint up and down the hallway in my building here.
There you go. You're a free man. Awesome. All right. Well, best of luck and enjoy the season.
All right. Thank you.